A few months ago, I sent an open invite out to my subscribers to send me a sample if they were interested in collabing, with the goal of making a small beat tape with as many of my subscribers as possible. And over the next couple weeks, I ended up working with 17 producers from this community to put together a full-blown, bona fide lo-fi album that is finally coming out. But more on that later, because today we're going to be talking about one track that I made with one of the producers featured on this album. And I'm really excited because I'm actually going to be handing it off to him to break down exactly what he did to make the sample he sent to me. So join me in welcoming, for the very first time to the channel, my friend, Halfstop.
Hey, my name's Jeff, and I release music under the artist name Halfstop. I'm excited to be on Luke's channel to do a beat breakdown for our track Lakeside Lull. This was the first collaborative track that I ever worked on, so I'm really excited to pop open the DAW and take another look at what I did there. But yeah, this was one that was made for Luke's first beat tape on his Discord server. So this is basically the exact loop or part of the track that I sent him originally, and then he did his magic on the track and made it much better. But we'll take a look and see where it's at before I had sent it to him. So without further ado, we'll pop over to the DAW. All right, so here we are inside of Logic. This is the exact session as I left it some time ago. So you can see that I had actually, like, Luke had asked for a loop, but I had actually already kind of started to flesh this out into a track. But I really thought that it was missing some elements, which I'm sure Luke will talk through some of the stuff that he added and made it sound much more like a full cohesive track. But really, I started this track by building this main loop right here that I have highlighted. So I'm going to go ahead and play this so that you can kind of get a feel for what this sounded like, in this version, and then I'll break down a few of the elements. So there you go, that was the main loop, and I think it's a decent loop for starting with, but I think, just looking at how I'd kind of started to break this out into a track, I think it's pretty clear to me, now, months later, after having made some more tracks, that it's really lacking some kind of variety in the sounds, as well as you can see there's a lot of similarity in the patterns. This violin is just doing that walk down, this cello is just doing this walk down on those pads. The bass is doing the exact same walk down. So, a lot of times I like to think about the different instruments kind of combining into a chord at different parts of the frequency spectrum. So if the bass is, hitting the roots, then maybe the pad can kind of hit some of the thirds, and then maybe a higher guitar or something can be hitting between thirds and fifths and stuff. And that all kind of combines to create the chordal sound across the frequency spectrum instead of this more kind of repetitive walking motion. So yeah, I probably can talk more to what I would change about this track than maybe what I like about what I did, but we can just kind of break down a few different things. These drums here, you'll see the pattern. You can see this is I think probably the safest lo-fi drum pattern. It's one that I actually really like and still use a lot, although I would definitely add some more variety to the sounds throughout, maybe some layering on the snares and some more variation in the pattern. You can see here I really just repeated this drum loop throughout the entire track without any sort of changes, so I think it definitely gets feeling a little bit stale as it stands right now. But yeah, the drum pattern is basically snare on the 2 and the 4, got the kick on the 1, and then somewhere between kind of the 3 and 4, I like to vary where that kick's falling. So you can see here, it's a little bit further from the snare. There, it's right before the snare. That's something that I still really like to do, just kind of varying where that second kick falls, and sometimes even omitting that kick entirely. It starts to build kind of a lazier vibe, I think, into the song. So I think that's really nice. Then you have, some hat or shaker sounds to kind of keep the rhythm going, even as those kicks are varying, and obviously the snare is kind of the anchor. But yeah, in this case I'm using a VST called Beatmaker Cozy to pull these sounds from. it's a pretty awesome plugin. I think it's much better for kind of like boom bap or chill hop styles. I think for the sleepy styles, it's a little bit harder. So I honestly haven't used this for quite some time, but back then I did use it quite a bit. Probably the last thing that I'll touch on real quick before I wrap up and let Luke kind of take over is like my process for doing the guitar takes. So I think like the overall process that I follow is typically coming up with like a main backing loop that sometimes is like a piano loop or sometimes it's a guitar loop. So like here you'll hear it's this little guitar loop. So you get the idea there, but basically I'll come up with some sort of little loop like that, record it, start adding in some pad sounds, maybe some bass, and then, you know, definitely the drums I always add before I do a guitar take, or almost always, because that helps with my timing, and I really don't love the sound of a metronome compared to drums. So even if I end up changing the drums down the road, I like to kind of have some kind of drum sound when I'm recording the guitar take. And then, you know, from there, I just kind of let it loop while I record a bunch of different takes. And let's see here, I'll play this first take for you, like the full take, just so you can kind of see how it's similar to the last take, but there's some like mistake and maybe like a lack of kind of me fully knowing what I'm doing here. So I'm not going to make you listen to those screechy noises any longer, but you get the idea. Like, it's a similar melody, but it, you know, over these next few takes, I was working out either getting through mistakes or timing issues. And then at that end part, obviously, I just didn't really know how to kind of close it down yet, or kind of bring the melody line to an end. All right, well, that is the end of the breakdown of the portion of the track that I sent over to Luke. So excited to check out his part of the video to see all of the good things that he did with it from there. Thanks again, Luke, for having me on the channel, and I look forward to catching all of you on the Discord.
Huge shout out to Halfstop for coming on the channel. Be sure to give him a follow on Instagram, Spotify. I'll link all his stuff down below in the description. But let's hop into my version of the project and see exactly what I did to bring this thing home. Right away, you'll notice that most of what's in here is just kind of like audio files from the stems, and that's because, like Halfstop said, this was really a pretty fleshed out track. This was a pretty interesting project for me because, like, I was the only one of the 17 producers that was able to hear all of the samples. We all kind of voted at the same time that it was going to be fun if it was a surprise. So essentially, like, no one else knew what anyone else was sending. So I got everything from like a simple chord progression and a piano melody all the way through to something like this that was practically a finished track that just needed like a little bit of love to kind of get it quite over the finish line. So in this case, there wasn't much left to do, in my opinion. I thought that it was a well-developed melody. It obviously was laid out with an A, B, C section. There was a little bit of like nice energy shifts going on. I really just made some kind of minor changes to the mix, a little bit to the drums, and I swapped out the bass sound before I added just a couple of shakers. So let's kind of go through each of those pieces one by one so that you can see exactly what I was doing to take what Halfstop had made and turn it into what I felt like was pretty much a finished track. Right out of the gate, I basically just kind of took what he gave me. Initially, he had sent me both a bus with a couple effect automations and one without. So I ended up taking the guitar bus that had the effect automations for just a few key points where I liked the automations a lot. So the first 4 bars of the intro has some nice kind of like filter and panning going on, baked right in straight out of Halfstop's DAW. And then right before the second drop, I took it again where there's this nice like filter and reverb swell going on. Outside of that, I just took the kind of like unautomated main backing guitars that I had a little bit more control to dive in and do a little bit of processing, basically just a little bit of EQ to kind of shape the sound a little bit better, make sure we're not dealing with too much muddiness. So I cut out around 122 hertz here, tiny bit of peak filtering to try to help smooth out a little bit of harshness, and did that again for a second EQ. And then with the dynamic EQ around 550 hertz, I was just kind of taming a whole region where things are kind of like bursting out. And then for the lead guitar, pretty much left this one alone, you know, arrangement-wise. Didn't do anything transformative effect-wise. I just wanted to pop in and take a look at any potentially problematic frequencies. So I got a nice high pass here, make sure we're leaving plenty of room for the bass. And then once again, a little bit of peak filtering going on. We ended up compressing it because there were a few points where the transients were getting pretty aggressive. Like I can see this one sticking out right here. You know, normally this would be a great time to use a transient shaper, but I actually don't even think I had one at this point. So I just used regular compression with, you know, a 0 millisecond attack time, an appropriate threshold to grab onto those peaks that are poking out in a really, really strong ratio. Just kind of slam those really percussive bits out. So let's give a look at what that's doing exactly here. So you can see the limiter is not really affecting any of the melodic audio. It's just grabbing onto this kind of like percussive hit that's going on. So without the limiter, we end up with this. So this is just helping kind of tame those like harsher hits of the pick there. So if we just listen to the first drop guitars with none of the EQing, it sounds like this, and then I'll kind of toggle them on as we go. So altogether it's pretty subtle, but I feel like it kind of combined to just kind of warm those guitars up a little bit, smooth them out, make sure nothing's really just poking through anything too harsh on the ears there. So moving on from the little bit of guitar processing I did, I really just kind of popped in. The stems when Halfstop initially sent them were super quiet, so as a bass line I brought everything up by 25 dB that you can see here. And then just kind of adjusted things directly in the audio clips at first to get them a little bit closer to where I wanted. So I brought the lead guitar up an additional 1 dB relative to everything else. I brought the hi-hats way up, you know, and another quick math, 11. Another 11 dB on top of what I turned everything up. I thought they were super quiet. On the other hand, I felt like the kick and the snare were super loud compared to the melodic component. So I only brought the kick up 11 dB, which is effectively like turning it down. You know, you guys get the idea. But anywho, long story short, I basically just leveled stuff right out of the gate to get everything like kind of sitting a little bit nicer together before I did a little bit more granular mixing in the actual mixer on these faders here. So actually, before we move on from the guitars, I just want to talk about real quick this Verb Pad layer. I've talked about this exact approach on my channel a couple of times, but essentially I just sent a few of the melodic elements over to this really large Valhalla Supermassive. It's a Cygnus 1, which I think is one of the large presets, mixed to 100. Volume's turned pretty low, and I've widened it out 44% in the stereo field. So essentially, it's just taking the melodic information that's already there and creating like a pad layer that automatically incorporates whatever is already being played. And I just shaped that specific reverb signal to make sure that we're not getting any like crazy high reflections, low reflections, or a bunch of buildup anywhere unpleasant. I feel like that's a pretty nice little technique to really like tie things together, make the, you know, body of the track feel a lot bigger without really needing to think too hard about what sounds you want to add. It's kind of just this natural cohesive pad element that gives it this nice like kind of dreamy foundation. So the only major change I made to the original sample Halfstop sent is rather than using this original bass part that he sent over, I ended up switching it to this key bass part, which is, you know, just this really like sub-dominant free plugin I've talked about a ton on the channel. You're going to continue to see it all the time because I actually love this bass. And that really had to do with the fact that this original bass sound had a little bit of like pitch drift going on and a little bit of these like uneven harmonics baked in that just felt a little bit weird in the mix to my ear anyway. So when I play this, you're gonna notice a little bit of like kind of motion in the fundamental and the harmonics, as well as like some unevenness in the harmonics that I feel like ended up making this bass feel just a little bit wonky in the mix. And then when we compare that to what the key bass looks like in the same exact, you know, settings here. We're we're getting those much stronger sub bass frequencies. Our fundamental is a full octave lower, but then we've got these like really even harmonics that are still filling the same space the initial bass sound was. I just felt like that kind of really helped solidify the foundation on this one and make it feel a little bit more complete, a little bit more polished. And then the one other kind of major change I made was really just that initially in the loop half stop descent, I know obviously he wasn't intending this to be a completely fleshed out track, but as it was, all the drums and the kick and the snare was essentially just repeating the entire time. So I just went in and I found a few key points that I felt like a break would make sense in either the kick, the snare, both the hi-hats a bit, just to create a little bit more intrigue to the drum part, give the ears a break from that kind of continuous motion, and create a little bit more drama and contrast in moments of like right before the drop, for example. On top of that, one of the kind of other tiny changes I made, I just decided to throw a couple of shaker layers, 2 different shaker loops in the 2 different drops to both, you know, create a little bit of variance, but also create a little more intrigue rhythmically. So as the drop hits, the hi-hat's doing, you know, pretty nice simple pattern, but it's like this really high kind of washed out reverbed hi-hat that has a lot of space in these kind of like slightly unpredictable 8th note, quarter note interplay things going on. So when I added the shaker, I really just wanted to try to fill in a little bit more of that space using the similar frequency spectrum. So in the first drop, those together sound like this. And then in the second drop, I picked a slightly more energetic shaker loop to complement the increase in energy I was going for. So just having that little bit of interplay, it's mixed super duper low in the mix. Like it's really something that I think is meant to be felt less than it's heard. But I feel like it really helped kind of drive the groove a little bit better there. You know, other than just a couple of like little effects things, like some vinyl noise I had ripping throughout the whole song and some white noise and reverse cymbal transitions, the only other thing I really added here was just one additional guitar layer for 4 bars in the second drop. Because as it stood, it was basically the first drop was copied over to the second drop, so I felt like we needed something to develop the track just a little bit more. So I decided to lay down this kind of like nice warm mid guitar harmony that develops into a little bit more of a call and response melody as we work through those 4 bars. So coming into the second drop, this is what we ended up with. So altogether, I think this is a pretty nice demonstration of what I think is one of the hardest parts of the production process. And that's really just like taking a song from a really, really strong idea to pretty much finished, right? The things that I did here were very small, very minor, but I do feel like it did a lot to really like bring it home and make it feel complete. And all things told, I really didn't have to do much to turn this into a track that I'm super happy with. So once again, huge shout out to Halfstop for putting together this awesome sample and for coming on the channel to show you guys exactly how he did it. If you want to give Halfstop a little extra love, be sure to listen to Lakeside Lull. It's coming out tomorrow on all streaming platforms along with 3 more tracks from the compilation album. We're dropping 4 songs every week through all of September, so if you want to hear the whole thing, be sure to give me a follow on Instagram and Spotify. And if you're someone that might be interested in doing something like this with me in the future, definitely join the Discord server. It's a really great community. We're doing some pretty fun events. We got beat battles and collab compilations and things just like this going on all the time. It's a really great place if you want to interact with me directly or just work with other great lo-fi producers. So I do hope I'll see you in there. Thanks for stopping by. I'll see you next week. Peace.